Hey everybody, it's late Saturday night. Between now and kickoff tomorrow morning, we've all got a few lineup decisions to make, so I'm getting my top 10 ranks up anyway, and I'm going to explain a little bit of the logic behind those ranks, really quickly look into some deep sleepers for the morning, and then we'll be starting our live start and sit advice column right here in the comments starting at 10 a.m. Eastern, so have a look at the video, then hit me back at 10 o'clock Sunday morning, and we'll try to work on all our lineups together heading into game time. So you'll see here a list of the top 10s at quarterback, running back, and wide receiver. A lot of it, I think, is pretty straightforward, pretty standard ranks that you're seeing throughout the fantasy expert community, but I want to talk a little bit about where I deviated. For starters, I've got Matt Ryan at the top of my quarterback list. Shouldn't come as a big surprise. Matty Ice, or the Mattrel as we're calling him via Rich Eisen, has been at the top of his game this season. He's been fantasy's most consistent quarterback, I think, in the season's first 5 weeks, and I don't see any reason for that to stop heading into week 6. He's got the Oakland Raiders coming to town, so he's playing at home, indoors, against the Oakland Raiders secondary that's allowing 26.4 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. They're giving up 292 yards per game and an average of 2.5 touchdowns. Ryan should be easily able to put up those numbers, if not better, build on a performance that he put on last week that was really strong, at least in the second half, and post some fantasy points. It means good news for his wide receivers, as you'll see in the top 10 ranks there as well. Behind Ryan, we've got Peyton Manning. I know it's a really bold pick to put him in the number 2 spot, but I just like the way it looks this week for him. He's got a top 10 matchup against the San Diego Chargers in terms of fantasy points allowed on Monday night. He's coming off a solid game against the Patriots, throwing for 330 yards and 3 TDs. And I think that's going to continue. He's got a 1-5 record, I know, against the Chargers in his history, but I think he's able to put that aside this week and really get things done in a game that should have a lot of points. That's also why I've got Phillip Rivers ranked pretty high in the pecking order this week, because I think that game on Monday night is going to be a shootout. Going into the sleepers, I'm not sure that you're gonna call Christian Ponder really a deep sleeper at this point, but both he and Kevin Kolb have juicy matchups again in terms of fantasy points allowed by their opponents, with the latter facing a defense that has only held one quarterback under 18 fantasy points allowed this season, so there's no reason to think why Kolb can at least hover around that number. And if you're looking for a bye week fill-in this week, you could do a lot worse than, say, 14, 15, 16 fantasy points, and I think Kolb can give you that playing at home this week. Moving on now to the running backs. None of our top 3 have particularly enticing matchups this week. They're all facing pretty good defenses, all of them outside of the top 12 in terms of average yards per game allowed, but these are our top 3 guys for a reason. They've been consistently producing all season. They're able to run the ball and catch it, and that's why I've got them on my top 3. Really, that's going to rarely deviate from week to week. This week, I do like Foster the most of all. Did really well primetime last week against the Jets, and I think he's going to be able to continue that with the Packers coming to town this week. We've got Trent Richardson landing at number 4 this week, coming on the strength of a really strong performance recently, and due to the fact that the Bengals defense has allowed the 3rd most rushing touchdowns this season, 7 of them through 5 games, and I think because of that, that's more than a touchdown per game. I think Richardson, who carries the ball a lot, particularly inside the red zone for the Browns, he's a virtual lock this week to cross the plane, cross the chalk, and that's why I'm behind him as my number 4 pick. I've got another guy right behind him in number 5 who hasn't really given us top 5 numbers yet this season, but I like DMC. He's coming off a bye. He and the Raiders are going to be fresh, and while they may not be able to run all game against the Falcons, given that they may or may not be trailing, he's still running indoors, and he's still facing a Falcons run defense that's given up 5.4 yards per carry, which is pretty near the top mark in the league on the ground. And you've got to like him to be able to exploit that, and you've got to like the Raiders to have worked on a few things with their zone blocking scheme in their bye week and hopefully be able to take advantage of that matchup this week. As far as sleepers go, I'm taking the attractive names, the hot names on the list this week. Looking for both Vic Ballard and William Powell to have strong weeks. These guys are still probably largely unowned in at least 10-team leagues, and if you're looking for a starter, you could do a lot worse. They're going to have starters reps, and they both have nice matchups facing defenses allowing 30 and 31 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs respectively. Again, could do a lot worse than that. I'm not going to expect those 30 points certainly out of them, and I'm not going to expect dominant performances, but if you need somebody as a flex play, these guys are going to touch the ball a lot, and they're worth having in your lineup for sure. Moving on to the wide receivers, I've got a guy, particularly in PPR formats, but really across the board, Percy Harvin as my number one. He's given you only one dud this season, and if you're like me, you owned him in a kick return league, or at least a league that allows points for return touchdowns. So you got 6 points out of that TD as well. No harm there with Harvin. In fact, it's a nice little bonus. This week he goes to FedEx Field in Washington, faces a Redskins defense that's giving up more than 50 fantasy points per game to opposing wideouts. He's ready to feast on that. Harvin's been a beast so far. He's a big part of the Vikings offense. He's a big part of why they're winning football games, and they're going to keep turning to him. I really like him to have a big week this week against the Skins. We've got Demaryius Thomas pretty high on this list, but he's got a Monday night matchup against a beatable Chargers secondary. We just watched them give up 3 touchdowns and 9 catches to New Orleans' number one option. I see no reason why we can't see a 7 or 8 catch, maybe a score or 2 performance from Demaryius Thomas, building off a big game despite the fumble that he had against the Patriots. Moving to the sleepers, I got a couple names here, but I really like Andrew Hawkins for a big week this week. He's facing the Cleveland Browns, who give up 50.1, the second highest number behind the .4 fantasy points per game to opposing wideouts. And he saw 13 targets last week. Now, he didn't capitalize on all those. I think he had 5 catches, but Andy Dalton's looking his way. And in particular this week, with the Browns getting Joe Hayden back, number one, yeah, that 50.1 points per game number probably starts to come down a bit with him in the lineup. But number two, it means that Hayden's paying attention to A.J. Green. In his rookie season, A.J. had 10 points at both times he faced the Bengals, so he's a reasonable start. Faced the Browns, pardon me, so he's going to be a reasonable start for you no matter what. But he did that with just 4 catches, so Andy Dalton's going to have to look elsewhere if history tells us anything, and that elsewhere, given his 13 targets last week, is probably going to be Andrew Hawkins. Even if he converts on just a few more of those catches last week, and he shows the yard after catch ability that he showed early in the season, he could be in for a big game for the Bengals. I like him as a sleeper. I'm playing him myself in 2 or 3 spots. Feel pretty good about it. I'm hoping he's in for a good game. So that's what I see this week across the board. Hoping you'll check back with me very shortly, and we'll get together on some live advice. But this video will kick you off, help get your week started. So thanks for tuning in. We'll do this again. Good luck this week.